And if you made it to church this morning, honestly, that might already count as a miracle. Because not only did we spring forward last night, losing an hour of sleep, but the weather has been doing its best impression of a damp, gray dishcloth all weekend, save for a round of loud thunderstorms, just to keep things interesting. And so if you're here, if you're watching online, if you are just trying to remember what day it is after the daylight savings, grace and peace to you. Today is the third Sunday in Lent, and Lent is a wilderness season. It's a time when the church steps away from easy answers and sits for a while in the harder parts of being human. We talk about hunger, we talk about thirst, we talk about the places in our lives and in our world where things feel dry and uncertain and fragile. Which is why so many of our Lenten stories take place in the wilderness, such as today. We find ourselves in the wilderness with Jesus and the disciples as they have gone out to a deserted place, a quiet place, and the gospel tells us that they were trying to rest. Which makes sense because before this moment, the disciples have been traveling and healing and teaching, casting out demons, facing rejection, and then hearing the devastating news that their friend John the Baptist had been executed. They are tired, they are grieving, they are overwhelmed, and so they go to the wilderness for some quiet. But the crowds follow them, thousands of people, like how a young child or eager puppy might follow you into the restroom, just wanting more of you. And suddenly, what was supposed to be a quiet retreat becomes a logistical nightmare. It's getting late and people are hungry. And the disciples are doing the responsible thing. They say to Jesus, "Send the people away so that they can go buy themselves something to eat." Which, if we're being honest, is a very reasonable suggestion. This is the moment when someone looks at the situation and goes, okay, what's the practical plan here? Because the math is not encouraging. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 men, plus maybe some women and children. Even if you're really good at fractions, those numbers do not work out. And the disciples say something that anyone who has ever planned a church event or family gathering or a community project might understand. They basically say, this is too big for us. Too many people, too little food, too little time, too little money. And Jesus responds with a sentence that must have made them blink twice. You give them something to eat. Not, I will feed them, not watch this miracle. You give them something to eat, which, from the disciples' perspective, is absurd. But then Jesus asks another question. Go and see what you have. Start there, not with the scale of the problem, but not with the impossibility of the situation. Let's start with what's already in your hands. And they find 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then Jesus does something curious. Before anyone eats, before the bread multiplies, before the miracle becomes visible, he tells the crowd to sit down in groups, 50s and 100s. Which might seem like a random organizational detail, but think about it. If Jesus were planning to perform a one-man miracle show, why the seating chart? Why organize the crowd like that? Because something deeper is happening. People are forming circles. Neighbors are turning to face one another. Food will not just appear, it will be passed. Hand to hand, person to person. Bread baking, bread breaking, baskets moving, and community forming. And suddenly, the miracle begins to look different. Not because Jesus does not feed this crowd alone. He places the bread back into the hands of the disciples, and they pass it out. And somehow, through this network of shared hands and shared responsibility, everyone eats. Thousands of people in the wilderness fed, not by one pair of hands, but by many, very many. Which begins to sound a lot like that other wilderness story that we heard from Miss Kathy. In our reading from Exodus, the people of Israel are wandering through the desert. And the deserts have a way of stripping things down to the essentials. You find out very quickly what matters when you're in the wilderness. Water matters, food matters, community matters. Because in a wilderness, no one survives alone for a very long time. The Israelites are desperately thirsty. They're wandering through a landscape of dust and stone and heat, and they cry out to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here? Are we supposed to die of thirst?" And I love to picture these people as just like big whiners. They're real dramatic. Until you remember that dehydration is not a minor inconvenience. In the wilderness, thirst is life or death, and it is mighty painful. And so God tells Moses to strike the rock, which sounds strange until suddenly water does begin to flow, clear and cool out of a dry stone. Water where there shouldn't be water. Life where there shouldn't be life. A miracle in the middle of a wilderness. But the water doesn't just appear in individual water bottles when Moses strikes the rock. Someone has to gather it, carry it, make sure the children and elders get some first, and pass it along. In both stories, the wilderness problem is the same: hunger and thirst, deep fear of scarcity, and not having enough for the living ministry that lies before them. And in both stories, God's response is not isolation, it's community. It's shared water, shared bread, and shared responsibility. And that matters because we know that the wilderness is not just a place in the Bible. Sometimes the wilderness is the world that we wake up to in the morning. A world where conflict and war breaks out across oceans. A world where violence shakes our neighborhoods. A world where it can feel like the problems in front of us are far bigger than the resources we have to solve them. And the temptation is always the same as the disciples' first instinct: send people away, let someone else deal with it. I am too small, too finite to perform any Jesus-level miracles. But Jesus says, you give them something to eat. Not because we individually have the power to solve every problem, but because the kingdom of God was never meant to run on individual effort. It runs on shared bread, shared water, shared courage, and shared care. If you look closely, you can see glimpses of that miracle happening all the time, all around us. When first responders miraculously rush in on 6th Street in record time to help Austinites in the midst of a mass shooting. When neighbors cook meals after a birth or an illness or a storm. When communities organize to feed people who are hungry in the face of growing economic instability for the most vulnerable. When a church fills its weekends to the brim with special things like funerals and council retreats, confirmation intensives, and high school hangouts, and then in the next weekend, it gathers to celebrate a quinceañera one day and bless young drivers the next. Small things, life things, bread being passed. But when those things happen together, something remarkable takes shape. A network of care and a community that refuses to let people face the wilderness alone. So this Lent, when we ask the question, tell me something good, when I'm standing out there at that welcome center trying to chase you down with my little camera, try and keep this in mind. The good news this week is, together, the impossible is possible. Not because the wilderness disappears, not because our problems shrink, but because God refuses to let us face them alone. We come to the table, we are fed with good things, and when there are inevitably still baskets left over, we keep passing it along until all are fed. This is most certainly good news for us, today and every day. Thanks be to God.